Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This is day 5, Friday morning. I think it's a terrible idea to have a panel this early on a Friday morning, especially after 5 days of crazy events. But thank you all for being here bright and early for here in Davos in our Women in Tech event at the Ahura AI House. And thank you for a distinguished audience, including Dylan Taylor, the CEO of Voyager. Really excited about this conversation today. We have an incredible panel here. I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves and some of the work that you're doing. And then I want to dive into what the future looks like in technology. Obviously, we're in the middle of a massive upward directionally with AI. We've passed that point of inflection in the graph. And so 2024 looks like it's going to be a fascinating year. I'm looking forward to learning from you guys around what you're seeing in the marketplace. So let's just pass this down if you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you're doing.
Great. Thank you. My name is Bleu Blakslee. I'm the Senior Advisor for Emerging Markets and Philanthropy Partners at Save the Children. 35 years in the field. I came back to Save specifically to help the conversation on emerging markets, and we define that in the space of Web3+ is what we call it. So resources being built in new spaces. And I would say that Save the Children, really our focus is to lean into innovation because there's a lot going on. In order to get to the SDGs, we've got to think differently. So that's, our application with AI, cryptocurrency, and other spaces.
And Iliana Oris Valiente. I spend my days as the managing director at Accenture. I run our Canada Innovation business, which also includes the work we're doing in sustainability. So it's never a dull moment, given that my work is across industries, across emerging technologies, societal trends, and figuring out what is the impact and the so what to the end humans involved.
Beautiful. And Mary Carbajal, I've spent my career in technology, growing up from, I think, as an adult from cradle to finally seeing so much incredible technology over the course of the last 2.5 decades. I feel so blessed to have been a part of this time in my life. So come from corporate world. I've been working in large corporates all over the world for well over 25 years now. And decided to walk away from the golden handcuffs and do something that could be much more meaningful in the world. So I started a company called Bios, and we are really looking at applying technologies across the entire Web3 landscape into how do we allow people to have their identity connected to their health information, and how do we do that in low to middle income countries, including refugee camps around the world. So.
Hi. Very nice to meet you, everyone. I'm Loretta Tioiela. I'm the founder and managing partner of NextSequence. NextSequence is an accelerator fund based in New York and Paris, and we're working in what we call now tech bio. So tech bio is actually the convergence between AI and bio, but it's this new generation that we can call biotech 2.0, where we can see the strong effect and impact of AI in its way to leverage actually technologies to create impact. And so through AI, we see now in biotechnology working on problems such as aging, but also cancer, fighting pandemics, and we saw it with the fast development of the RNA vaccine for the COVID-19 disease. But we can also have fun, and so we see an application of AI in bio for the usage of fashion tech, of cosmetic products.
Amazing. Thank you very much. So, Iliana, let's start with you. So one of our speakers yesterday, Gregory Johnson, was kind of talking about how AI, we're having this kind of Warhol moment right at 15 minutes. Obviously, AI has been a thing for the past 50, 60 years, but finally it's gotten into the global consciousness, and it looks like 24 is going to take that even further. So given your work at Accenture, I mean, you get to see from a bird's eye view everything that's happening in the tech world. What do you see as opportunities for entrepreneurs and people here in Davos in 24? What should people be thinking about?
So the use cases for AI that have the most potential, I would put them into one of two buckets. There is the technology that can be used within the enterprise, because the enterprise as we know it is fundamentally being reimagined from the inside out. And so think of the enterprise software business ecosystem, tons of opportunity there. But the other market for the AI space is very much so the end consumer facing side of things, because we've never had a technology that has such a simple user interface and has the potential to impact people regardless of what field of work they happen to be in. But one of the areas I know I'm personally really excited around is the training, it's the workforce side of things, because a lot of the research shows, and we at Accenture have put out some research that suggests that 40% of all working hours are going to be affected by AI, and a quarter of the workforce is going to require training by 2025. And last I checked, 2025 is only 11 months from now, and so there's certainly a really large gap in terms of awareness and where people are in that education type of journey. I mean, I have conversations all of the time with people who might work in the graphic design type space, and I'll ask the question of what AI tools are you comfortable using? And sometimes they look at me and they say, well, I haven't really had time to dig into it because I'm so busy with my day job. And the prompt that I need to give them is, you need to carve out the time in order to invest in yourself. It's not the concern that many people have of AI is coming to take your job, but you're now competing with people who are using AI versus those that are not using it. So those are the two big categories, but regardless of whether you're talking through the enterprise or the personal lens, there is an interesting trend that we're paying attention to at Accenture. We've just talked about it in our recent Tech Vision report, and it's this idea of human by design, and that technology is becoming more human in that it is starting to mimic the things that really make us the way we are, the way we think, the way we see, the way that we feel and navigate the world around us. Before, technology used to be this clunky thing, the mouse, the interfaces, if you're not a software developer, how do you interact with some of these tools? Now it's becoming so intuitive that soon that blurred line between the human self and the digital self is going to go away. And I mean, we've talked at length about My Digital Human and some of the other projects that illustrate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I want to double click on this. Many industries are being transformed with artificial intelligence, where people that, to your point, use AI are able to be much more effective. Mayor, I want to turn to you because you are in the medical space. There was this report that just came out that showed that doctors, or the AI that doctors are using, are now much more effective at identifying ailments than doctors. So, of course, I took a screenshot and sent it to my parents because, to their great chagrin, I did not become a doctor and brought shame upon my family. But so I'd love to get your feedback. Obviously, you have a great company within the healthcare space, but what are you seeing as some of the trends that are happening in the medical space?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's double click on cancer, right? Because they've gone really, they've leapfrogged in that particular space, right? And so I've talked to quite a few doctors across the oncology space, and just the data that they have, the ability for quantum, right, to sit and analyze images so much quicker and catch detail that even humans miss, right? And look at, first of all, we've got doctors that are going into such burnout these days, right? Now, people are leaving the workforce by masses, and unfortunately due to COVID. So now I think AI really steps in and really assists the doctors in that. So if you look at the ability, obviously all the data is yesteryear's data, right? Because it's years of data that they're looking at. However, the ability to jump in and catch what the human eye sometimes misses, right? If you think about that. So it's going to be such a great assistant to medical professionals moving forward. But that's one of the biggest applications that we see today. And BIOS, what we're doing with AI sitting on the back of it, as data starts to come into the platform, we're going to start to do predictive analysis using AI, right? And so how do we look at a data set you've got sitting in the back, and so you've got people who have comorbidities, right? And so how do you start looking at patterns that happen within those different sets of people, right? And the different challenges that they have in life, and then get to disease detection much quicker, right? So that you can either stop harm or cause further harm, right? So that's really what we're doing. We've been talking to another great topic here is we've been talking to people that are in the epilepsy space in Ireland, for example, right? We're doing some really great work and just starting to talk about what that looks like, right? So today, they don't have the ability to see, for example, what's happening in a seizure in a person. So it's by word of mouth, right? But with BIOS, immediately a caretaker could go in and just click and start capturing that, right? And so now we're starting to capture video, we're starting to capture audio. What we're doing with audio, even in a telepresence call, is for a doctor or a physician to be able to, a nurse, whoever's in that call with the patient, to be able to detect their, just by voice, are they experiencing anxiety? Is there something else they should be asking them based on, because in these meetings we see doctors for maybe 10, 15 minutes, right? And then the last point I'll make is one of the things with not only AI, but even wearables, when you start to look at deep technology out there, we've got data points all over the place, right? And those data, I'm so sorry, I'm just like, right, I've got someone to my right, and we've got those data points all over the place out there, but those data points tell us individual pieces of data about ourselves. Nobody's really pulling that together to say, just like your fitness app, right, where it gives us a dashboard every week to kind of keep us in check with what we're doing, right? How do we actually do that for our vitals? So whether you're putting data in manually, because people have a heightened sense of awareness. A lot of people say, married people aren't going to do that. Well, you know what? People didn't want to get in an Uber at the beginning either, but look, it's taken over the world, right? So how do we now start taking those data points, whether it's coming from a device or whether it's coming from someone who manually puts data in because they don't have the ability to have those devices, right? Then, and a doctor be able to go in and say, let me see, Mary, I want to look at you for the last, okay, I see your pressure's not so great here today, but let's look and see for the last 30 days what's happened.
Sure.
It's not been there before, right? And we want to get to the point where AI really starts to drive nudges to a human for their health as much as we drive nudges for our, because AI's running the financial stock market these days, right?
Yeah.
So how do you do that from a health perspective?
For sure. Well, I want to double click on exactly what you just said with Loretta, because the data that we collect as a society can help tremendously in figuring out new therapies and new medicines. And you're in the medicine space, in the pharmaceutical space. What are your thoughts on both the power that we all know of artificial intelligence to identify better compounds and much quicker processes, but then on the opposite side of it, what are the mitigating factors around personally identifiable information and around making sure that data doesn't go into the wrong hands, because there's unintended consequences that can result as well?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think there's different views for me in there. First, I would say the technology part of things, where I spent 15 years of my life, and so definitely how you're going to handle this data is actually very important on different aspects. If you think about what you're trying to accomplish, you're trying to accomplish something that is big, curing cancer, for example, or being able actually to help people on a day-to-day life. Cancer is a huge problem, but such are actually chronic diseases. A lot of people are actually dying from diabetes every day, and so you have this approach where technology is the mean actually now to actually do that. But how do we do that? We have still a long way to go on many aspects. You were talking about the data. I think when it comes to the data, there is this notion of garbage in, garbage out, unfortunately. And so the part where we're actually emphasizing on how do you capture that is very important, because if you're just relying on manual entry, then you know that definitely a human being actually faulty. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to be corrected. And so if you want to be able to build reliable models, because we're talking about people's health here, so 90% accuracy is not good enough. You need near perfection. You need 99.999. So you need that notion of how can we make sure that the way that we capture this data allow for a very high quality. And this is where application that promotes actually not just manual entry, but some form of digital acquisition is actually very important. And I think this is only the first step, because then when you think about how are you then moving along this data, I think one of the issues that I see right now with all the hype around data and AI specifically is the fact that people don't realize that, yes, of course, you might have the data, but then yet again, you need to train training. And so that means that you require infrastructure. And the reality of things is right now, not a lot of people can do that. Actually, only the big players can really take advantage of what it is. Because if you really think about it, the reality is GPUs are actually very costly when it comes to electric consumption. They actually could swallow up actually the entire Netherlands if you look at the last actually statistics reports on the actual footprints of data centers that are running GPUs. So I think there's a lot when it comes to how do you make sure that society is actually being able actually to leverage the advances of this technology in the purpose of addressing diseases. And then what we see is that well, it's not just diseases, it's not just drugs and therapeutics, but it's pretty much everything under the sun. And based on the latest bio-revolution reports, we can say now that it's pretty much everything that the human being consume or produce. And this is what we call the bioeconomy. It's a $4.5 trillion market expected by 2030. So 2030, again, it's not as close as 2025, but it's just around the corner. And so how are we going to see our entire society transition to pure AI, to something where AI finally come within bio and then changes everything? It can be diseases and the way that we're thinking about diseases, but let's face it, the reality is we're thinking about our health in terms of fixing a problem. We shouldn't be trying to fix a problem. We should be actually living in a way where before the problem occurs, we have actually prevented it. And this is where we see also this trend where medicine and digital health is actually transitioning from this, passive position where we were just trying to fix something that is broken to giving very high, I would say, customized recommendation to people so that they can make better decisions on the day-to-day. So very exciting time indeed, definitely.
Absolutely. And so I love everything you're talking about. And I want to talk a little bit more about something you said around not only using AI to solve problems, but try to identify those problems beforehand so they don't get out of hand. So we had Irakli on this stage over the past couple of days. So he runs AI and robotics for the United Nations, but he works very closely with global law enforcement and Interpol to address some of these challenges. And so, one of the great use cases, for example, and to the work that you're doing in Save the Children, was there was a group of people that were trafficking children, and they had a picture of the child in their ear, but they were able to see on the background there was one light fixture. And so they fed that through an artificial intelligence, and they were able to identify exactly where this person is, and they were able to disrupt that entire network within 2 weeks and arrest everybody. And then he was also talking about, on the other side, the use of AI to threaten children, right? Where what they're doing now, apparently, is creating videos of kids and manufacturing videos in such a way that they're then able to scam those children, control them, manipulate them, and threaten them into doing things. And so the question is, how do we resolve some of these externalities where AI has some incredible opportunities, but it also represents, when it's in the wrong hands, some terrible things that can happen, especially to the people the most vulnerable. So at Save the Children, what are you guys seeing on this some of the negative externalities that we're facing, and how do we address those?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's exactly what we have been thinking about with regards to how does AI come into the conversation of protecting children. And we are definitely working on some pilots around that. We see the application for that. So I think, I had mentioned before, in the nonprofit space, we typically lag in lots of conversations. I would say that's true with regards to AI. And that's why I'm really glad that we can have a seat at the table, that we have these conversations, because these are the kinds of problems that we need to solve, and it needs to be an ecosystem of partnerships, right, to come together to be able to tackle that kind of problem. But yes, that's an application that we are working on.
And so going back to you, Iliana, we've had a lot of conversations this week on this stage around where that line is between going full AI accelerationism, like Tufi was talking about, of just putting your feet on the gas as we approach the cliff so that we don't fall directly down, versus Anusha was speaking about, hey, let's take a step and think about the billions that are being left behind. Let's think about how we can make sure that the most vulnerable aren't hurt by this. So where do you think that line is, and what can we do to find that line?
So I think for a lot of the corporations who, and I'll mostly speak through the corporate perspective, given that that's where I spend the majority of my days, there's no shortage of the potential uses, and a lot of the corporates, like in your case, they've done the early thought experiments, they're doing the pilots, but this is really the year that they're shifting into scaling the applications. And one of the things that we've been encouraging our clients to do is to consider the responsible AI components and to build responsible AI frameworks within their organization, because it's difficult to operate on a project-by-project basis and try to come up with all of your frameworks on the go. And most organizations are quite open to this idea of having something that's set up at the enterprise level. And one of the components of those enterprise-level AI ethics and responsibility frameworks is around externalities and unintended consequences, and making sure that there is a clear process in place to ensure that each project, as it goes from the early ideation, pilot, all the way through to implementation stages, isn't accidentally accelerating the divide that many people are concerned by. People aren't afraid of technology because of technology itself. People are afraid of the potential change that technology might bring to their lives, because fundamentally, people don't like change. Change is hard. Change, by definition, is a threat to the status quo, and we certainly want to bury our head in the sand and say, la, 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 this is not happening. So in order to overcome those hesitations, we need to be incredibly proactive with illustrating that those that are in positions of power to roll out major AI applications are spending the time to consider those broader implications. And there's lots of models that are emerging around private sector supporting nonprofits and the charitable sector. And frankly, the charitable sector alone, it's not exactly the most efficient one today, right? I was doing a presentation to a number of board directors in the nonprofit space, and 70% of the tasks that their organizations are working on could potentially be augmented with the use of AI tools to help them overcome the perpetual shortages of staff and shortages of budget. And so that's a way that you can use AI to actually accelerate some of these social impact-driven causes that we all want, that once again start to shorten that divide.
Bryan, can I add something to that real quick?
Of course.
I think, I'm going to put my corporate hat on, because when you've worked for, the Shells of the world and the Microsofts, there's people lose sight first of advisory groups and governance types of groups, right, that really should step up front before you even start thinking of bringing all the engineers and whoever else needs to come to the table to go build something, right? So I think what really companies, even small companies, doesn't matter what size you are, really should focus first on, because this then starts to make sure that we're getting rid of the biases, because that's a lot of the challenges that we think about when we think about AI as well, right? And so how do you make sure that you've got the right people sitting at the table up front, that you put the right governance in place for that, so that you understand what you're bringing into it, right? So you talk about creating that right framework, right? But you've got to have the people and the right people, and sometimes those people are not the technical people at all.
Usually not.
They shouldn't be, as a matter of fact, right? And so it's for me, a lot of that comes in kind of operationally. How do you manage that, right? And what's the process that you're going to put in place to make sure that the intended outcomes, and by the way, set intentionality of that outcome up front to where, people are afraid of change, but people are also afraid of consequences, right? And then what's the educational component that you're going to bring in to start educating people through it? Because people just, they're afraid of what they don't know as well. And, AI, we throw AI around like we talk about, different brands of drinking water, right, these days. But there's a lot of complexity to it, and I think a lot of times, companies miss the ball because we don't put education in the front of it to make sure people really understand what it is, don't be afraid of it, embrace it, and this is why, and this is what it can do, right? So, thanks.
Well, incidentally, that's actually what we do at Ahura. We have been going into quite a few corporates, including some Fortune 500s, to educate their teams and their employees on how to use AI effectively to augment the work that they're doing. But going back to what your point around social impact and especially women in technology, look, obviously at Ahura, 40% of our executive team are women, 45% of our team in general. Here in Davos, we have the Equality Lounge. We are seeing a lot of attention being paid to make sure, from a social perspective, we're including all voices. And at the same time, in Silicon Valley, we still see that I think it was last year, only 3% of VC funding, or 2%, has gone to female founders. I mean, our own Michael Kosick, who was here earlier, with Loyal VC, they're about 33% of their investments go to women, which is fantastic, but we need more of that. So I want to turn to you, Loretta. What do you think, as a female founder and someone that's been doing incredibly well, what do you think needs to happen to kind of shift? Because in some areas we've had a lot of success, but it seems like in some areas we're still lagging behind.
Yeah, in 15 years on technology, I definitely saw the shift and back and forth when it comes to the subject of women in tech. I think it always starts with, I would say, a willingness to do so. So most of the companies where you notice that there is kind of a discrepancy, you just have to look at the top. Who are the top managers? Who is the CEO? And generally, when you speak to that person, it's really easy to understand why the company in itself is actually not actually doing well on this. And so you could say that, yeah, it's only just the reflection of one human being, but I don't think so. I think in general, it's kind of a correlation of the way that our society is ready or not to give a place to women. And unfortunately, over the years, we have seen that what we maybe have taken for something that were granted might not such be. We have seen a lot of regression in many areas for women, even in very developed countries such as the US. We have seen a lot of front over the world where actually the comeback, which is actually being fought, is actually the question of the place that we want to give to women in society. And it can take the shape and form of religion, but it's actually not about the religion. It's really about the fundamental view of the world of where is the woman place. And so I think as long as these debates and fights are still ongoing, there is a lot of things that every one of us can do. And of course, we need to have, I would say, pillars, and they can be actually deployed through governmental policies and companies' policies. But I think it's also start with everything that each one of us can do at the very individual level. But to bounce back on your number, there's also some reality. You cannot have actually more than 3% of women being funded as a startup entrepreneur if, to begin with, you only have male VC. And as a VC myself, who actually have built my own investment firm, I can tell you that I represent that very, very small minority of women that are part of the guys club. In VC alone, there is less than 3% of them that are actually women. And even among these 3%, very few of us are actually actual managing partner. Most of us actually in VC are just actually partners that have, climbed the rank and managed to push everything aside to have a seat at the table. So, if you only have less than 1% actually of women in VC, then you shouldn't be surprised that only 3% of women are getting funds. So it's a very mathematical, correlation. So yes, we need to do more. We need to have first more women in VC, and then we need to actively also contribute at every level to make sure that the fight to make sure that there is this kind of equality. And it's something also that relates into technology in itself. How can we talk about advances in AI when the data set are only actually built for only part of the population? If you think about fundamental problems such as endometriosis, well, the problem is we don't have the data, and we don't have the data because in 15 years of gynecology, well, we didn't really make the effort of gathering this data, because research on this were not something that were actually getting funding, and no one was interested into doing the data. It's the same. Our model are being built. Are they not biased because you only take one part of the population? So there is a lot of things that needs to be done on this question of equality and diversity, and it starts with women, maybe, of course, but it can go a long, long way to extend much, much more than just women in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I'm a big believer in the adage that you can't become what you can't see out there. And if we look at the VC model, when you look at the upper echelons, it's not the most inclusive domain. And so there is an interesting organization that I've come across that's actually trying to flip this model by supporting first-time fund managers. And their thesis is, let's take someone who has been a business person, because there may be fewer obstacles to launching that business, getting that exited, and then helping them become a VC. Because once you have more VCs around the table, they'll be able to look at products through a more diverse lens of what are the end customers actually looking for, to then be able to back companies. One of my favorite stories to share is of SheerTex. They're the company that makes stockings, so sheer stockings that are indestructible because they're made out of the bulletproof vest material. Brilliant concept. And they were going through an incubator where, as the story goes, they actually got eliminated from the incubator at an early round. And the reason is the investors who were around the table were all men. And they asked the question of, wait a second, if you have a pair of reusable tights that doesn't rip every time you get on an airplane, is that a big enough addressable market? We don't think this is a big enough market. We're not going to invest in this company. So one of the investors goes home, happens to be talking to his wife, and is talking about the various companies he had seen that day. And SheerTex comes up, and the wife says, please tell me you invested. And he said, oh, no, we passed on them. And she convinced him that that was a poor decision. He came back and said, actually, can we reconsider the choice? And now SheerTex is booming. They've rolled out all sorts of products, because it turns out that, hey, people actually want sustainable products that don't rip. It's super convenient, and there is actually a real business case. But if you're not a human that ever wears tights, how would you ever be in a position to make the determination that this is actually a good business? So you need to have those VCs in order to get more of those entrepreneurs.
I'm definitely in on there, because I think there's so many examples, and the statistics are there. Women founder outperform actually male founder by a lot, by in between 20% and 30%. So that's huge. So if you really think about it, and if you're really all in about all making big return on your investment, well, if you do your math, you would go for a woman, because you're pretty much sure that by 30% you might actually get a better investment. So I think you have many examples like Canvas, the co-founders of Canvas. One of them is actually a female, and so Canvas has been refused by more than 100 investors before they managed actually to get the initial funding. And now Canvas is IPO. They're actually a multi-billion-dollar company, and so we cannot say that this is not a big, massive return on investment.
Absolutely. So I want to bring the conversation back to you, and we're going to slightly change the conversation, because you're working with Save the Children. One of the questions then is around how we can educate the next generation of women. I remember I was at an event in Europe with the Princess of the Netherlands, and she was talking about all her work trying to end child marriages, especially in developing nations in Southeast Asia and other places. And one of the things she kept on running up against was when they tried to do education to these families to say, hey, you shouldn't marry off your daughter when they're 10 years old or 12 years old. This is weird. The problem they kept on running across is the families would say, well, if we wait until she's older, then if we can't marry her off, then we have to pay for them for the rest of their lives if they're too old and they're no longer virgins and all that stuff. And so what they recognize is if they could guarantee to those families, hey, let's put them in school, let's get them an education, and we guarantee that you won't have to pay for them throughout their whole lives, suddenly the families were willing to not marry off the daughters when they were very young. And so when you think of education in these underserved communities, having an impact on the number of children they have, having an impact on the way that the women are treated downstream. What do you think are the opportunities to provide these kind of educations to children as a tool to reduce the suffering around the world? Sorry. That was...
Yeah. No, that's a great question, and it's one of the things. So what I love about SAVE is we're 100 years old. We're in 110 countries. We work very closely with all the players on the ground. We have great partners like Accenture and others. And that ecosystem allows us to think very strategically on what are the pain points for children and work on bringing thought leaders for questions like this so that we can, instead of theoretically think about it from our perspective out of country, but to think about it practically and to implement things practically on the ground, working with stakeholders. So education is a really important component of that, and helping to bring access to education. So, for example, I can tell one of my personal stories. 10 years ago, I was with Save the Children. I took a group of retired Microsoft executives to Bhutan. The reason that we were invited in is because the country felt like they could trust us. We'd been there 30 years before. It was UNICEF and SAVE. And what they wanted to do is understand the access of the cloud because they had just opened up their borders and they didn't have that knowledge, and they didn't want the educators to go out one at a time to get that information, but rather aggregate that information. And so they asked Save the Children to come in to bring their expertise to the table. That's a game changer because, one, we're able to bring access, right? We're able to bring experts to the table. And that then in turn helps children because they're afforded the capacity to be able to get these tools, right? And to be able to learn. So, and what we're trying to do is empower children, right? Is to move them from situations like that to be able to educate them. And then we have so many next gen leaders out there. And if they just had access to education, to tools, capacity to grow, that's a different world. It's different thinkers coming to the table and helping to lift their own countries, lift their peers, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And shameless plug, as part of the reason at Ahura, for every license that we sell to corporates, we give away free licenses of our technology to members of underserved communities globally, especially with a gender and diversity lens. And then we work with partners to provide laptops and internet service. I want to turn to you, Mary. One of the things that Pablos was talking about, Pablos Holman from Stage, is that in the Western world, we use about 8 times more energy per person than someone in the developing world, which means with that level of additional energy, we're able to do all sorts of things. And now with the advent of retail and user-focused artificial intelligence, the people that have access to those tools will outperform people that don't. And so you obviously worked at Shell in the energy space. What are your perspectives on how we can even the playing field and enable people around the world to have access to the resources and the tools to be able to be competitive with those of us that are privileged and are in the Western world?
Great question, Bryan. And I'm going to take it feeding off of what you just said about what you guys are doing, right? For me, it's all about partnerships. Right, and so you have to start looking at who are the partners that you bring in. Shell's a great example of that. People don't realize all the great things that Shell does underneath the covers, right? So if they're a company, obviously they think of just oil, right, and what horrible things they're doing for the climate. But Shell has come a very long way in that space and is doing incredible work. And I'm proud to have worked for that company very much so. But what I want to say with that is you get partners like a Shell or like a Chevron or like those guys to come in, or you get companies that are the smaller companies that are out there that are bringing solar, right? I mean, you look at a lot of the underserved communities in the world. probably get the most sun than any other places in the world, right? So how do you use those partnerships like the Dells or like the Elons and like the Starlinks of the world, right, to come in and truly start working with you, right? I just came from Jordan and did a medical mission trip with a great group of doctors, Atlantic Humanitarian Relief Group. And you know, this is when we were out there, we were looking at how do you operationally bring a BIOS there, right? So do they have internet connectivity? Do they have ability to have energy, right? To be able to power up those laptops that you're going to bring over there to them, right? Or do they have, so how do you start looking at bringing in the right partners in the right places, right, to distribute what it is that we need to distribute from a educational base, right? Because most of it you're trying to really educate people first and foremost, right? But yeah, I think that partnership is everything in that answer. You know, we have to, and look, these big corporations, they're looking at their CSRs now, right? And so what can we do to start partnering with the younger companies that are out there? And I think it's our job as kind of budding companies and in an entrepreneurial space to really start going after those large corps. And I don't think they're going to just slam the door in our face. I think they're going to be willing to have conversations with us to say, yeah, how do we come on board? How do we start, you know, because they want to be socially responsible and good global citizens as well in that space. So I think we have to put the energy in going talk to those folks and getting them on board like you guys have done, and put the work in and build the partnerships with them and ask them to come on that journey with us, because we need them. And nobody's going to solve these problems, these large, complex problems we have individually. It's all going to be based on partnership. So for me, let's go get the right partnerships out there to make it happen. And the big energy companies, I think, are right there with us. So.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And to your point, Elon just told a group of the biggest energy providers that, hey, within the next short period of time, we need to 3x our energy production. Pablos was talking about by 2050, we need to 10x the energy production just to keep up with demand. And so that's something that we have to work in partnership. We can't villainize, thank you, Liana. We can't villainize folks that are already trying to provide that energy and moving in the right direction. Liana, I do want to go to you.
Brian, sorry, let me make one more point. I apologize. I just want to say this. Also, there's so many great startups out there in the energy space that are really coming out with such a low footprint that, you know, of carbon footprint as well, right? I met a lot of them here, actually, right? So also, how do we go get those young companies to go work with us to where you don't have this massive, big cost to put infrastructure in place? Because, you know, look, energy takes infrastructure to some point. So how do you look at that? And when you're talking about underserved communities, it's about the footprint at that point. Not only the footprint of cost, but the footprint of capital that it takes to go and do that. Because you can't just fly those kind of pieces of equipment into rural Africa easily, and drop it into a lot of the rural communities where you really need this. So how do you do that with the lowest amount of friction and cost and in footprint?
Well, before we go to you to plug Pablos, so Pablos Holman is one of the companies he's invested in is trying to put massive solar panels in space and then beam that energy down, because then you can beam it anywhere in the world without massive sets of power lines and so forth. Plus, when you have the solar panels in space, you get a much higher level of efficacy. And so these are the kinds of cutting edge technologies that we really need to support to be able to bridge that divide, that gap of energy. But jump in.
I want to bounce back on this because I think it's definitely the right way to go on so many levels. And Pablos is someone that I really, really appreciate, a very close friend, and he's amazing. And I think he's exactly the kind of person that needs to be on stage because he's giving that kind of direction of where the industry is going and also where most of us and more of us should be going. And I think that the point that he's making here is on the fact that investment strategies and investment in general are shifting. We are moving away slowly from that, tech bubble where we were all focusing on SaaS startup and where we were let's be realistic, a little bit more concerned about fun and entertainment rather than actually addressing deep problem. Yes, along the past 20 years, a lot of startups actually continued building and addressing this fundamental problem, but most of us were really kind of investing into the emoji startup rather than actually, really trying to solve this problem. I think what we're seeing right now is the shift toward deep tech, and sure, there is deep tech it's deep, of course, but it's not just because it's deep about the technology, it's also because it's the change in the way that we're thinking about the world, the impact that we want to have. And I think that one of the points that you're making here is the fact that this shift in strategy from an investment perspective, it's also a way of thinking about building this strong partnership. Because typically in Europe right now, one of the latest unicorn is Vercor. Vercor has been able to raise billions of dollars just because there have been a massive investment coming from actual sovereign funds, governmental funds. And so the reason why it was needed, why so much money, was not to just build I would say, a air riding up. It was because deep tech require most of the time a huge amount of investment in terms of capex. It's actually very costly in terms of infrastructure, and therefore, if we want to have changes, we need to be able to support this kind of startup, and that requires exactly that. Partnership, a way to think about how do we do this in a different way than what we used to be.
That's amazing.
One extra thing I'll add in, so it's not just the partnerships, but you touched on something really important, which is the financing aspect. And I've been in a number of discussions with large financial institutions who are starting to say, well, wait a second, we have all of these goals around ESG. How do we actually start to deploy capital to make it easier for companies to do the energy transition projects, whether it's decarbonizing the entire fleet of vehicles that our corporate might have on their books? If you're a telecommunications company, you have a fleet of cars that needs to go out to your various customers' homes as you're replacing modems, doing installations, and so on. You're not in the business of running a fleet. You're definitely not in the business of figuring out how to go to an electric fleet. So how do you structure those non-traditional financing arrangements that align all of the incentives for the outcomes we want as we go to build that future world, humans actually want to live in?
This is exactly that. One funny thing is, everyone is talking about AI right now, and even in the VC industry, we are all talking about AI, but we're not consistent with what it requires from us. And so if you really in my case, typically, we're trying actually to fund these companies that are actually leveraging AI in the context of bio, whether it's drugs and therapeutics, climate tech, or fashion tech, it doesn't matter. But the reality of it is, to support these companies, we need them to do AI. But if we want them to do AI, they need access to infrastructure. If they need access to infrastructure, they need the money, because for them, training these models that require a huge amount of data, that they spend so many effort actually gathering and labeling, and then they need the training. And then to be able to do that, it's going to cost $1 million to be able to do that. So it's our job to work on the financing layer and making sure that the VC model as it was before, it's not really something that is applicable anymore with this new kind of generation of startup. And that's just the reality of it. And I think that over the years, we're going to see this shift where we're going to see more and more stakeholders aligning themselves with the fact of, if we want these kind of companies, then we need to rethink about our entire model.
Sure, absolutely. Well, so we are out of time, but let's give everybody 60 seconds to give their final thoughts, starting with you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for including us. I think it's really important for nonprofits to be at the table. We've got a lot of work to do. We need to make sure that there's access. AI is part of that conversation. And also, we, on the nonprofit side, need to think differently, which is what we are trying to do at Save the Children. And I just want to mention that we have a global venture fund. The theory and thought of that is that we will maybe not get to what we need to get to for the SDGs by 2030. So we're focused also on a venture fund that is around child-centered investing. So that's really important for us, because we want to keep thinking outside of the box, because we have a lot of work to do and we need a lot of partners. So thank you.
So I think my overall takeaway is technology is exciting. Progress is happening quickly, and you can't stop the progress. The train has already left the station. And we have to balance that out with the fact that, as we talked about earlier, change can be scary. But what we can all control is our own response as individuals and how we react to some of the changes out there. So, for example, my team got me this T-shirt made. So they're like, Iliana, thank you. They're like, you're really embodying what it means to dive into the deep end with both feet and to experience the new technologies out there. We could sit back and read all of the books and listen to all of the podcasts about the trends out there. But it's very different from when you actually start to roll up your sleeves and start to build and start to experiment. I know personally, as I've been going through the process of building my AI digital human twin of myself, Lila, there are so many new questions and frontiers that we have been uncovering just by virtue of starting. The questions of, how do you refer to one of these digital humans relative to your family lines? Are they your children? Are they your grandchildren? Are they your siblings, right? All of those are considerations you couldn't have predicted while not actually starting the race. So think about your individual response, think about how you can embrace technology, and think about the unintended consequences. All of that needs to be true as we move forward.
Brilliant as always. Thank you.
So, I always come from it, Bryan, as you well know with me, whatever we build as a technologist, I started coding on the mainframe back in the early 90s. And as I've traversed the landscape of technology, I've always said, when you're looking at building software, if you don't think about everyone, start over, right? So especially as we go into this, as we cross the chasm, so to speak, right? And I think that the one thing we have to always be mindful of is, who are we serving, right? How do we serve them well? How do we learn? How do we bring them to the table? How do we get them involved up front? Technology should never be developed in a vacuum, right? And you should always remember that we are not our customers, right? And we should always make sure that our customers are at the table with us, whoever they are. So I just say to the world of AI and all of us that are developing in this space, be mindful of the people that we are serving at the end of the day, and make sure that it reaches the most vulnerable and marginalized. And let's figure out how to bring them. These are our children, by the way. These are children being born in refugee camps. Let's not forget them, right? And let's figure out, how do we bring them into this? Because I think there are brilliant people that sit in every corner of the world, and we have yet to find them. And so how do we make sure that we're inclusive and that we are building to educate the world and not just the few?
Absolutely.
Oh, wow. Thank you for that. I think this allows me actually to give my view of how I see the world moving. I think we are sitting at a crossroad. Again, I'm definitely biased in this convergence in between AI and biology. But my conviction behind is that for maybe the first time ever in the human history, we have the ability to entirely change the course of our civilization in many, many levels. We have technologically the means now. We are getting so close of curing cancer. We are getting so close of extending our life. I'm thinking about living well off past that 100-year barrier. We have so many possibilities, but all of this cannot happen if we do not make it as a civilization and a species. And I think that we can only do it if we manage to actually educate, make sure that everyone is actually part of that history, and that will require massive alignment. And so I want to see and believe that AI and bio is going to be this next industrial age that is going to be the one that is going to be bringing us into another civilization. But for that to happen, I want to start first with this notion of bringing all of us together. So.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for coming and sharing your thoughts. This is an absolutely brilliant panel. Let's hear it for our amazing panelists. Thank you so much.